morning. This is a really important conversation about social entrepreneurship. Thanks to Infinicom and the team for sponsoring this really important conversation, because a couple things are going on in America right now and around the world. 54% of millennials want to be part of a startup. In 5 years, 40% of the workforce will be millennials. So there's this push to want to start up. But then there's also this helicopter parent dynamic where young people want to be part of a startup, but they don't want to go first. They don't know what to do next. And another interesting thing happening in America right now, I read in the Wall Street Journal last week that for the first time in 35 years, more companies in America are closing than starting. So there's this really interesting dynamic where people coming up into the workforce want to start something, but they don't know how to go first. And they want to give all their money away right away without building it over time, which is the traditional model, building up, and then having this nest egg of money to give away in your retirement years. So there's these conflicting forces in the market. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to talk about much of that, even though it's a really important conversation. But I do know and recognize that social entrepreneurship is a big thing right now in America today and globally. And forgotten voices in the story that I'm going to share this morning, in our story, I recognize fully that we are just one step in a giant journey this world is taking to explore this big, big topic. So, but I am, because of the nature of what we're doing and the journey I've been on and the way that God has orchestrated my life, I am fully aware, though, that I've seen a lot of stuff. And so what we're going to try to do this morning is do a little balancing act. My dad is a good dancer. I'm an okay dancer. So I'm going to try to do a little dance and try to cover a lot of things. But we're going to break it up into sections. So the first thing I want to do is give you a background about who I am, how I see the world, what has brought me to this place of doing something that I never thought I would be doing while I was a student at Messiah. So we're going to do that for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to do some question and answers about the journey that we've been on at Forgotten Voices. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn the tables to you and have you do a conversation around some framing questions I'll provide about what does social entrepreneurship mean to you personally and the communities that you're involved in. And then we'll do some question and answers about social entrepreneurship in general and how we might take these ideas that we've shared and go out and change the world and declare what our God is for at a time where he's only known for what he's against. So that's my hope. It's a big ambition. We got a lot to do, so let's get started. Okay? So I am an unlikely person to be doing what I'm doing now. I had no interest in Africa at all. No interest in orphan care, really, besides, oh, isn't that sad? When I was a college student, I was really committed to urban education reform. When I was a student, I remember tutoring and doing some development work and community engagement in Allison Hill and parts of Harrisburg, and working in the Agape Center that my friend Chad Fry is part of now, and working in the Agape Center and working at a place called Abba's Place. And I remember bringing a little boy home, he was a third grader, and returning him to his house. And his mom was in jail for prostitution. His dad had been killed in a drug deal, and his grandma was an alcoholic and was beating him on a regular basis. And I just remember returning him after dark to his house and saying, "What do I know about this? This is just too big and too complicated." So after college and graduating from Messiah, I took a job in economic development. I worked for a company called CREDIC, the Capital Region Economic Development Corporation. As part of the Harrisburg Regional Chamber, figuring that economic development and creating a better way could bring transformation for the communities I was seeing and engaging in all the time as I was walking the streets of Harrisburg, looking at something must be better than what we're seeing. We must provide a better way forward for children. That was a common theme throughout my life. Education, children, and community development. And I fully recognize that this one picture doesn't depict the state of Harrisburg, but you're never as smart as you are as when you're 21, right? And just thinking that, like, this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to, urban redevelopment. And so for 5 years, I worked for CREDIC. But a crazy thing happened as I was working with entrepreneurs and startups and trying to get people to launch their companies. Something happened that I never expected. I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. at all, until I started working with these people. And then one day I just remember saying to a friend of mine, these people are like me. And the three common traits I would point out, there's probably lots of them, but three common traits I would point out about entrepreneurs is one, they're restless. They just are constantly challenging and changing and innovating constantly, just questioning, why is it this way? Isn't there a better way? So really, like, I think the two traits right off the bat would be, one, they're just looking to innovate everything, right? They're just challenging the status quo, and then asking questions constantly, like, why this, why that? And as they're asking questions, they really believe in a unique way. Entrepreneurs really believe in a unique way that the customers have the answers. It's not like, how do we convince these people that they need this product? It's really like asking lots and lots of questions and believing that customers and whoever you're trying to serve actually have the answer. So you're trying to innovate in such a way that you can get the questions answered by the people you're trying to serve. So not accepting the status quo, asking lots of questions, and then figuring out, like, how do we sustain this and how do we replicate this? And that was like me, in ways that I didn't even understand. So in my third year at Creedic, I got presented a really interesting opportunity to go to Harvard. And I was on my way to Harvard because in a post 9/11 world, I'm the son of a pastor in New England, which is not just apathetic to Christianity. My childhood was anti-Christianity, right? And so in a post 9/11 world, after growing up in an anti-Christian environment and then coming to Messiah, I found myself relating really well to Muslims in a post 9/11 world it wasn't just apathetic to Muslims, it was anti-Muslims. And so I wanted to go to Harvard and leave Creedic and look at how different faith groups could get together and work together for social change and community restoration. So my job at Creedic, and then I wanted to go to Harvard, but then my pastor called me, and I was on my way to Harvard. Like, I quit my job at Creedic, got an apartment in Boston, I was on my way, weeks away from leaving, hired my replacement at my job, and my employer was trying to get me to stay, and Creedic was trying to get me to stay, and I was like, no, I'm going to Harvard. But my pastor called. My pastor in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania called and said, hey, you do project management, economic development in the city of Harrisburg and in the region. Would you be interested in going with us as a church to Zimbabwe and look at what we can do as a church with the orphan crisis? That's a big shift and a completely different direction. And I just remember thinking, I'm an entrepreneur. What about this situation, not accepting like the status quo? I had this trajectory. What about this disruption that God is providing should I give thought to? And what about this opportunity is interesting? And through a whole series of events, which I'd be happy to answer in question and answers, because there's so many that I can count, I ended up going. I called Harvard, said I'm not coming. They said, you realize we don't do waiting lists at this school? And I said, that's fine. If you have 15 minutes, let me tell you what I'm going to do instead. I'm going to Zimbabwe with my church, trying to figure out how to do orphan care in a unique way. And they said, well, how about you go and you can come next year and we'll fill out all the paperwork. And they sublet my apartment for me. Like, it was amazing. In a 15-minute conversation, Harvard was like, actually, yeah, go and do your thing. And then we'll check in with you in a year. They were just fascinated. And everybody, including my parents, thought I was crazy to give up a childhood dream after growing up in the Boston area to go to Harvard and to study something that was just so critical, how different faith groups could work together for social change, and instead go on a plane to a place I didn't even know where it existed, and I needed to raise $3,000 in a 10-day period. I never raised any money before in my life. I ended up raising $10,600 in 8 days because people heard about this kid who was giving up Harvard to go to Zimbabwe, and he had no idea what he was going to do. And people were just like, I'll give to that, which is another lesson that people will really give to anything, but probably not the lesson I want you to take away. But all that to say, really, the big message I have for us today is we're looking at what does social entrepreneurship look like for you, and how does it look like for me? It's this firm belief that I've come to know after working at this tirelessly since 2004 in that first trip. I mean, I can't tell you the grind it is to be an entrepreneur, but particularly a social entrepreneur trying to bend the long arc of history in the right direction and right the injustices that are plaguing children around the world. The weight of that is huge, but the thing that I want to impress upon you is that God is on the move. At least the God I know. The God I know is a God on the move. He does not cower. He does not fear. He's not surprised by the things going on in the world. And we are provided an opportunity to right what's wrong in the world. And as an entrepreneur, I have the privilege sometimes of going first and pushing people in directions that they're not comfortable and asking them to rethink the way that they've always thought. And so I found myself in Zimbabwe holding the hand of a dying woman and asking, what can I do? This young boy, his name's Peterson. He's now 17, but this shot was taken a couple years after his mom died. And I was holding this woman's hand in January 2005, before Forgotten Voices was birthed. And I just remember holding this woman's hand, and she would die the next day. And I just remember watching her watch her children watch their own mom die, right? And you can imagine yourself in that situation, and I'm a 25-year-old kid from the suburbs of Boston. I knew nothing about this. And I just remember in that moment thinking back on this little boy, this third grader in Harrisburg that I delivered back to his home, and saying, what did I know about this? And now that kid is a college graduate, right? And I had nothing to do with him after that year in Harrisburg. God is on the move, and it's not our world, it's not our place to do everything, but it is our place to do something. And so, where is God working, and how can I join him? Is like the framing question that I've come up with that I think might be helpful to you. You don't need to worry about like what are you uniquely called to, and college students worry about this all the time. Like, oh, what am I going to do? And they're afraid they're going to make the wrong mistake. And I know that we pick on college students for that thing, but many of you as I meet you have the same fear. How am I wasting my life? Don't worry about you. Where is God opening doors and moving, and how can you join him? Don't worry about what you need to do. Look for where God's working, because he is everywhere. Okay? So I'm holding this little boy's mom's hand. She died the next day. And this kid is still alive. He's 16 going on 17. He's still alive. And he taught me a lot, because for a year he lived by himself. He was 8 years old, lived by himself, was taking his 4-year-old sister to medical treatment. He didn't have a mom or a dad. And I just remember sitting under that tree with his mom and saying, as I said before, what do I know about this? And the answer was really nothing. It wasn't for me to fix. It wasn't for me to restore. That this was so broken, I just needed to listen. But as an entrepreneur, remember the three framing things I talked about. Like, as an entrepreneur, my mindset was not accepting the status quo. Like, okay, it's broken, but how can we fix this? What can we do? Can we fix it? Asking lots of questions. And what I didn't know, because I'm a kid from the suburbs of Boston, I don't know anything about this. Looking for people who did know, the customers, the clients. Under that tree with me were pastors who did know, and people who could have been doing anything else, but were sitting under trees, holding hands of dying men and women, and committing their lives to that. And they knew uniquely what these kids needed in ways that I could never know. And so, how can we make this replicable and sustainable? And so I came back, and you know what I did? After all these people gave me all this money to go to Africa, I said, I don't know. People weren't impressed with that at first. But then the longer they got to know me, they were impressed by that honesty and that transparency, and saying like, wow, here's this 25-year-old kid who's never been as smart as he is this time in his life, standing in front of us and saying, I don't know, even though we just gave him a truckload of money. And that honesty and that integrity and that sacrifice started to build credibility, and people kept telling the story, and the story kept growing, and people were just waiting to see what we were going to do, and we didn't have anything, but people kept sending money. And so finally the church that I was part of that had launched this ministry said, you can't stay here because we're getting $10 checks from Montana and South Dakota, and like people are hearing about this story, sending the church money, and we don't have time to process all this stuff. So a ministry was birthed. I was kind of a inherited entrepreneur. And it just kind of happened. And the thing about entrepreneurs that I've also learned is you just got to keep going. You just got to keep grinding and trust that your instincts and these questions that drive you are going to help you figure it out. I know that my friend Deb Pearson's here, and she could probably totally relate. As an entrepreneur, you pick up the phone and a client asks you, can you do it? And you say yes, and then you figure out with your team how you're going to do it. Right? You just got to keep grinding. And so that's what I did. I got back, and I started telling stories. And as we were launching Forgotten Voices, I started telling stories about local pastors in Africa. And sitting around, I was telling stories about me sitting around villages like this. This is Peterson's grandparents, trying to figure out what's happening. Who are these people? What are their heartbeats? And one of the things that somebody told me, one of the pastors sitting under this tree with me, this guy right here, he said, in 20 years of doing orphan care and working with churches and Americans who have come to visit his community for years, in 20 years of doing orphan care, an outsider like me had never once asked for his opinion. Not even once. Americans today spend $5 billion a year going on short-term mission trips. 90% of orphan care funding goes to orphanages that we build. For the same cost of a typical orphanage that an American church or churches support, that helps on average of 50 kids, we can help 1,000 through the local church in Africa. So we have to rethink all these questions and all these answers from pastors were under trees in Africa were teaching me that something in the system was broken. It wasn't just that Peterson lost his mom. It was that our response was actually creating detriment to perpetuating this society. So it wasn't just that this was sad. It was we were contributing to the sadness. We had to do it differently. So this is what we came up with. We realized that the church in Africa was growing really quickly. Really, really quickly. In 1900, there were 9 million Christians in Africa. Okay? So many of us were asked as children to pray that God would move in the hearts of people and the church in Africa would grow. And now it has. There's 540 million Christians on the continent of Africa. Over half of Africa would declare themselves as Christians. That's incredible growth. But the way that Americans engage with Africa really hasn't changed that much. It's about us going there and doing stuff. And then eventually, after we read a book, we invite them to be part of it, right? So could we change that? Could we figure out how to invest in them and shorten the time to solve the problem for kids like Peterson? So what we did is we partnered. One of the big things as I was going around telling stories is that one of the big things I learned is people distrust churches in Africa, right? In the same way, I think people distrust when I was growing up and working in urban education and stuff, like people distrust authority. And so one of the things I learned is that for trust, we needed to partner and have a vetting way to engage with the right pastors. So we partner with seminaries. So we partner with accredited, theologically sound seminaries. That took away who are these people and what kind of pastors are they? And they were also a natural perpetuator or natural replicator, because every year, like Messiah College, they graduate people. And these people are leading local churches, who are mobilizing volunteers, who are taking care of children in their own communities. 75% of Zambian families, one of the countries where we work, 75% of all families in Zambia take care of at least one orphan child. All families. Less than 1% of American families do the same. So these are people who are willing to do it, able to do it, had a heart to do it, but just weren't being invested in. So what Forgotten Voices does in less than a minute is we help local churches create custom plans that are unique to their church. So what about their church is unique, and what are the needs that children face uniquely in that area? And that's come from questions, right? Asking questions. We then make quiet investments into those plans. So those plans are funded and run by the local church, but the kids who benefit, the caregivers, the children orphaned by AIDS, don't know anything about Forgotten Voices whenever possible. They only know about their local church. So really the attention, the credit goes to them, and it should. Because at 3 a.m., when there's a crying child, my daughter was up from 1 to 4 in the morning this morning. I'm tired. From 1 to 4 in the morning this morning, crying. That's love, right? When you and I are eating breakfast, that's not the hard part. When we're talking about this, that's not the hard part. So they should get the credit. So custom plans, quiet investments, and then sustainable income. Every mother wants to care for her own child. Always. So sometimes that's not possible, but where it is, we should let her. And so how do we equip local churches to have sustainable income so this can go on long after we go away? And just one quick example. This is a woman named Cecilia. I know the light is bright, but Cecilia was a woman that we used to support before the sustainable income. We used to give her $100 a year. No, it's $360 a year. And we did that for a few years. And then her church saw in her that she was an entrepreneur. Gave her a $100 grant. And she started this little shop selling fish and meats and eggs and stuff. And she, in a year period, that $100 grant, she was able to send her own kids to school. She bought another plot. She bought a fridge, a television. Like, she was off and running, and we don't support her anymore. And it just communicated to me that that poor or formally uneducated does not equal a lack of intelligence. And I think that's a misnomer that we have. Like, just because someone doesn't have something doesn't mean that they don't know what they want and don't have a plan for how to get there. They just have lacked a catalyzing force. So Forgotten Voices, at its essence, is catalyzing community-based responses to the orphan crisis in Africa. And the story I have to tell you as we close and as I open up for question and answers is that I know that we move fast here. We've moved fast, really fast this morning. But this is an unlikely story. I'm an unlikely person to be leading this. This is not at all what my parents or I thought I'd be doing, at all. But the thing I want to impress upon you that's common to not just my story, but all of our stories, is that God is on the move always. And all of us are social entrepreneurs in a way. And that how can we create common good by contributing our best of ourselves, admitting the things that we're not good at, and creating space for other people to join us in filling those voids. That's true for all of us. And at its essence, that's social entrepreneurship. Like creating a common good to create change in the world and disrupt the things that have always been that could be transformed. And all of us, I am of the firm belief that all of us are social entrepreneurs. And because we all serve a God who's inviting us to watch him do miraculous things through us. And that's the story. Like our weaknesses and the things that we don't know are actually the best part of us because it points people to our God. So I'm a firm believer we're all entrepreneurs. And this work is hard, but it's not for us to fix. It's God's work through us, and we just get to help. He's chosen us to help. And I don't know if you care about orphans. I didn't, really. And this isn't really a sales pitch for Forgotten Voices. But I will say that I have come over the last 10 years to firmly believe that everybody should be involved in orphan care and widow care. Because not just because it's a nice thing to do. That's a good reason, but it's the last one. Because it declares what our God is for at a time where he's only known for what he's against. And it helps us see that we need these people that we serve far more than they need us. And if we take that humble position, we can all do more and accomplish more and have a whole lot more fun doing it. Because the problems of the world are big, they're complicated, and they can be overwhelming. They can be crushing, if I'm honest with you. They can be crushing. But that's not our problem. Our problem is to do what's next. This is not at all what I thought I'd be doing. And the invitation I have for you in whatever circles of the world that God is moving in. Don't worry about the journey that will be 10 years from now, because I probably would have never done this if I knew what it would take over 10 years. I wouldn't have. It would be foolish. On many things. Not funny, but foolish is one of them. But the thing that we need to do as people, as followers of God, is to just do what's next and be faithful to that. So, yeah, and this is just a fun picture. I always like to end with this picture. I don't do this anymore alone. There's 1,500 volunteers in our network of churches that we support that we don't pay, that daily take care of kids that our supporters invest in. And Remy, our Africa director, he was a risk assessor with Barclays Bank, pinstripe suit guy, corporate executive who felt called by God to quit that job and 70% unemployment, quit that job and become a children's pastor, unpaid. And I met him in his last semester of seminary. And I said, hey, I'm trying to grow this thing. You already have this capacity. Why don't you do it? And I go to breakfast in Harrisburg and tell the story. And so Remy and I help lead Forgotten Voices, and this is a fun little shot. And yeah, I'm just really excited. We're in a race. We're moving really fast, and we're in a race. And I'm just really excited to be out there and talking to folks like you, not just about Forgotten Voices, but so excited to talk about social entrepreneurship and how Christians really are at the forefront of that, because we always have been. Our God is an unacceptor of the status quo. He's asking us, constantly probing us to revisit, why are you doing this? Why don't you love me first? And looking to replicate and scale his work through his local church, his plan A when there is no plan B. So yeah, let's do some questions, and then we'll see if I have to tell jokes if there's no questions, which you'll love less than you love the first part. Yeah. So who's got questions? And we're doing really well. Yeah, Jay, and then Terry.
How did your time at Harvard influence or change the direction of Forgotten Voices from before you went? What trajectory did it take you on as a result of that?
That's really good. Good question on two fronts. One, I didn't say this. I ended up getting to go back to Harvard. And I only say that just at God's provision, right? Things you give up. And I didn't think I was ever going to get to go again. I ended up getting to go. They ended up giving me a full ride to go to the Harvard Kennedy School, which was amazing. So I didn't have to pay. And they were just fascinated that I would give up Harvard to go do this, and then I was going to come to Harvard and then go back and do the exact same thing. They just didn't get that. So they said, well, you shouldn't have to pay to come here if you're going to figure out how to do that. And they were really captivated. Harvard was really fascinated with, Harvard gets a bad rap, I think, particularly in the Christian community. Harvard is hungry for excellence and hungry for success. And I think as Christians, we should be too. And so I think they were fascinated that a Christian guy who could be doing anything and could go to a place like Harvard was going to go back and work with rural, undereducated, poor people in Southern Africa and not tell anybody that they were there. Like, they were just intrigued by that. And we actually got a better return for our investment in Zimbabwe than Harvard was. They were spending 10 times more than us, and we were getting 10 times the results. So they were captivated by that. Like, what about churches are they missing in their model for sustainable development? So I think what the biggest thing I took away from my time at Harvard was the responsibility I have as a believer to pursue business excellence. Christians have big hearts, often little minds. I don't mean to be detrimental, but loving kids and hugging them is not enough. Their problems are complicated, and we can do better. And my friends from 54 countries in my class who had been and lived in every country that I've ever dreamed of going to refused to accept my heart as a good enough reason why they should give me money. What ideas do I have that are different than every other Christian who's come to save Africa? They just refuse to let my token sound bites be sufficient. So it was really enriching, pushing me. What else? Yeah, there's a lot of questions, and then Terry in the back. Terry's one of our board members. Make sure to get you in. Okay, just kidding. Go ahead.
At what point did you go from having that big heart and the sound bites to having the knowledge that you needed to have to make something happen?
Yeah. So did everybody get that? Where did the switch go from having the sound bites to then having the knowledge to go and make things happen? I always have two answers to short questions, and I'll do them succinctly. One, I think the more you know about something, if you're honest, the more you know about something, the more you realize you don't know. So I walk into some rooms, most rooms in America, I'm considered an orphan care expert. I have a Harvard degree, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm asked to speak around the country about this stuff. But then I go into areas of experts who actually do this. I'm a child. So I think reminding myself that this is way more complicated, and so to be confident about the things I know and hungry and curious about the things I don't, and take that position in front of any audience, and you'll learn a lot more. We all will learn more. And so I think having a confidence to know that the God I serve is God on the move, and I have a lot of really smart people who are surrounding me to fill the many voids, and it's created more opportunities for people to help. So being confident in the things I know, and being just as confident to declare the things I don't know, and watching, just like that first trip, how people flooded and invested in me because of that transparency. Like they saw something in that they didn't see in other things. That was educational. So yeah, Terry. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then secondly, taking risks.
Yeah.
No entrepreneur, you have to take risks. So you take risks in terms of what's ahead. There's a faith element to that as Christians. But, I mean, entrepreneurs take risks every day.
Every day.
You finance your house, you all in, and then you drive with passion like you talked about. So, I mean,
yeah.
Some of the things that come through that you didn't even articulate so obvious because you take a risk, you take advantage of opportunities, and then do it with such passion.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Terry. And I think that's a good point. And I think that I do think that entrepreneurs are passionate. I do think that they take risks. I think those are very true. And I think the thing that I'd encourage all of us, that if you don't think that you're those things, you're not passionate, or you don't want to take risks, you're risk averse. I have people on our board and different people in my circles who are risk averse, and I need them to make me stronger, so I don't hedge all of it in the wrong thing, right? But on the other hand, though, I also would really encourage you. I keep coming back to this message that this is God's work, and so as long as you're being wise and faithful and committed and passionate, and surround yourself with people that cover your weaknesses, that makes my job easier. Like I can push the fringes of our vision, knowing that there's going to be people who I trust and I've committed my time to and my energy to, that they're going to pull me back. So we need each other. So surround yourself with people who will pull you back. One person says it's like, I'm a visual learner. So someone said like, you need people to guide the kite. I'm like the kite pushing the fringes of the sky, and somebody's there to guide it, to make it soar when it should soar and come down when it's getting reckless. So I want to be a kite, but I need a string. Yeah, who else? Yeah, Jared.
What are your long-term goals for Forgotten Voices, 5, 10, 20 years down the road? When do you think you want to see it at that point?
Yeah, I'll give you 5. Because any more than that gets scary. But 5, I think we've helped, from this one little project, the big dream originally was to help 120 kids, including Peterson. We've helped 6,000 kids in 200 churches across Zimbabwe and Zambia now. We're expanding into new countries, Lord willing, in the next year. At least one this year, hopefully. But as we look to grow, there's 150 seminaries in Southern Africa, or in Africa, that are part of this group called Actia. So we're looking at, in the next 5 to 10 years, how do we keep doing orphan care through the local church, but then how do we work with orphan care organizations and seminaries across Africa and replicate our model? Like, we're getting success where other people aren't. How can we package that, train people at seminaries to then reach out to their graduates and equip them to do, like, how do we do a scale effect, almost like a franchise model? Would be the longer term thing, but the next 5 years, we want to be helping 10,000 kids a year in a sustainable way by 2020. So, we need about $365 a kid to do that. So, we have a lot of work to do. Yeah. Yeah, sure, John.
As someone who has benefited from hanging out with you from time to time, when do you anticipate God moving you to transitioning into a coaching role to help other people in that entrepreneurial?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah, and that's a great question. Let's end on that one, so we can do some coaching. So he asked, like, how do you see God transitioning you to being coaching people on entrepreneurship and doing this stuff? I think that the credibility that I've been given, if any, is because I'm doing it. And so when I go and I preach at a church, I might go and preach the exact same sermon a preacher preached, and there'll be a line of people who say, I just didn't know that God cared about orphans or widows, or that our God is this big, and the pastor will just be scratching his head saying, I just preached the same thing. And I think the passion is certainly something, the sacrifice is something, but I also think that this is what I'm doing, like I'm living it, I'm feeling it, I'm bearing that burden every day and still doing it, I think speaks to people. And so I think I can't anymore envision a world where I'm not doing this. I don't know what I would be doing if I wasn't doing this. And it gives me credibility to then go and speak to other orphan care ministries, because it's easy to pontificate about what's broken in markets or challenges. It's harder to do that when you're doing it. And so, no offense to academia. I love academia. But ideas absent reality is delusion often. So, yeah, thanks. So I think people want to know, is this guy serious? And so what I do just personally, I pick a person every quarter that I can dedicate a small amount of time to help them launch their ideas. So since starting Forgotten Voices, I've helped launch 16 nonprofits that are still in business. And some for-profits that are making some social good. Like, how do I take a Harvard education and other opportunities I've had that others don't and pour that into people without getting distracted from my mission? Because if I help the world and not help Forgotten Voices, what have I done? Besides sell books, maybe? I don't know. That's just not intriguing to me, at least now. So let's turn the tables around. I loved talking to you all. I love dialoguing with you. We're not done. We have a limited amount of time. So what I want you to do is just take about 5 minutes, and I want you to ask this question around your tables. I want you to ask this question. What do you see, speaking of Terry's point about passion, like, what are you passionate about? Don't talk a long time. Just what are you passionate about? You should know. If you don't know, just listen. What are you passionate about? And then where do you see God working or opening doors that you might be able to contribute to those things that you're passionate about? Does that make sense? So don't worry about anything else besides that. What are you passionate about, and where do you see God opening doors that you might contribute to in that? And then in another minute or so, I'll ask you another question. Go ahead. Get started. I'm sorry to do this. This could go on and on, right? But the cool thing about this is that you all know each other now. You can exchange cards, do some networking, keep the conversation going. You can stay as long as you want, but you can't do it now because we have to finish. Okay, so here's what I want to say. Here's what I want to do to land this plane. It's my new favorite expression. I have ADHD. I only say that because I didn't find out until April of last year, which is amazing. People who have heard this go, "Are you serious? You didn't know?" But what's amazing about that is I always look for ways to put that in there, and I don't think it fit there. But one of the things I'm passionate about, and I've grown passionate about through my work in Forgotten Voices that doesn't have to do with Forgotten Voices directly, is mental challenges that people have, mental and emotional challenges that people have. And I've seen, that's something I've grown passionate about by seeing entrepreneurs like me carry the weight of the world upon their shoulders, and then they are crushed by it, and their marriages are ruined, they're depressed, they're homeless, whatever the issue is. So I've become acutely aware of mental things, and God has blessed me with success in some areas of my life, not in all. And so anytime I can claim that I have ADHD, people go, "Really?" Because most people who have ADHD, they're labeled a certain way. So it's a small way I can be passionate about something and declare something without taking a lot of time to do it. So there you go. That was my little minute plug for ADHD. Go. Back to planes, see? So let me land this plane. Let's do some Q&A about what you talked about. Anything that we can, I can help facilitate questions, burning questions. How do I do this? Or how do I begin here? Any questions that emerge that you have on your mind about how to take action on this idea today? And we have about 8 minutes to do it. So let's go. Who's got questions? Yeah, Ethan.
Could you talk about that period of 5 years right after college where
Sure.
you worked at
Creedic.
Creedic. Was your mind wandering into areas of like, well, how can I develop a program for this, or how can I do this? Or did you find yourself wanting to be content with the situation rather than running with ideas?
Yeah. So the season of Creedic as a preparation, maybe for what I'm doing now, and a season of discontent, maybe a good. I loved my time at Creedic. I was just with some folks from Creedic on Friday at an event, and I was giving Otto Monroy, who works with us, a tour. He works with us at Forgotten Voices, and I just kept saying we, because Creedic owns the building that I was in. I was like, we are this and we're that, and it's amazing how it still felt like I belonged to the team. Anyway, Creedic was a really helpful time in helping me see that I was constantly innovating. Ironically, you know how I was going to give up Harvard, and I was going to quit my job at Creedic and go to Harvard, and then decide to stay and go to Africa. I had just gotten Creedic a grant to start a thing called the Keystone Innovation Zone and the Innovation Transfer Network at Hershey Medical School. And I just gotten this grant, and so Creedic let me run that grant. So during the day for 2 years, I was building a nonprofit and an engine and being paid for it. And then at night, taking those same lessons and going, okay, I just learned about bylaws today, so I'm going to create some bylaws for Forgotten Voices. Or this is how we create a board. And like now I'm starting a board. So I think the hunger and curiosity and the way that God kind of orchestrated that season of my life to then train me to do something that I didn't even know I was being trained to do. Like the challenges I'm facing right now are things I was thinking about in a different context 6 years ago, and had met a bunch of people who can now help me figure that out. So I just don't believe that time is wasted, and God renews all things. So it helps to have that framing reference to make the most of experiences that you've had. Like we have this project manager now. She's been working for 17 years wanting to do what she's doing now with us. But I see all the time moments of training and equipping that she's gained over 17 years that are for such a time as this. Like if she didn't have those things and that wanting and that struggle, she wouldn't actually be as valuable as she is today for us. So helping people see that their time is not wasted is the best thing I took away from my time at Creedic. Great. That was a long answer to a short question. Yeah, Ricardo.
We're a new church in Elton Hill.
Awesome.
Anyone familiar with Elton Hill or aware of the situation there?
Yeah.
How does a church impact in the greatest capacity a situation like this?
Yeah, so Allison Hill, how does a church, new church, or any church, impact a situation like Allison Hill in the greatest capacity? The framework that I use at Forgotten Voices, other churches and ministries have used, and I'd really recommend you all use these 3 points. We have these blue cards that explain these 3 points in greater depth at the registration table. I brought them less as a plug for Forgotten Voices, although that's important, but more as an equipping tool that these custom plans, I'd really use these same traits, and other organizations have. There's a church in Boston that supports our work, started with us, and now is helping restore their own communities using this framework in Boston, which is awesome. And using lessons from kind of undereducated pastors in Africa to transform suburbs of Boston. It's awesome. And so custom plans, I think for any, not just for churches, but for anyone, looking at putting the user that you're trying to help or address at the center, what do they have that's valuable to creating change in their own community? Like the custom plans, we spend a year helping churches see themselves differently, that it's actually not about money at all. What are their strengths? What are their capacities? What are their giftings as a church? How can they leverage that? And then what are the gaps, and how would they prioritize those gaps? That's really the essence of a custom plan. So putting the people in Allison Hill or wherever your neighborhoods or whatever your issue is, what do those people that you're trying to serve with have? And then quiet investments. How can you inject and make the people of Allison Hill the champions instead of our church? Like, communities grow together. If communities grow, the church will get its natural due credit over time. But really, it's all about God, right? Like, Mother Teresa's famous for shutting down her ministry at one point. It exploded, and it got so big. And she just, it wasn't exactly how this happened, but we don't have a lot of time. She just kind of looked around and goes, like, what are you all doing here? Like, I'm just here. I'm called to serve the poor. I don't know where this huge ministry that's using my name to grow this thing. And she sent them all home because she was called to help people, and the rest of them are riding her coattails. Like, churches should be about God, and the rest will take care of itself. And then lastly, sustainable. Like, how do you bring even like the people of Allison Hill along right at the beginning? Like, people know when we start a ministry with them in Africa that in 5 years, we're not going to give them any more money. So they have 5 years to figure this out. And if in 5 years they haven't made money, we've done everything that we can. And so really from the beginning, it's got to be theirs, and the quiet investment part helps. If you lead, it's really hard to get off the stage and let other people lead. So don't be a leader from the beginning. Makes it way easier to walk away. I'm having breakfast with you all, and our work is going on right now. That was delicious bacon, right? Like, I'm here, they're there, the work is humming, and it's better because I'm here eating bacon. That's better, right? Okay, is that cool? Okay, so custom, quiet, sustainable. And there's information on our website, lots of tools. They're free. We give them away to all orphan care ministries and you. ForgottenVoices.org, check it out. Okay, who's got it? Maybe one more question. Matt.
What kind of things do you do to intentionally move donors closer to the story that's happening so far away? How do you get people more engaged?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one I'm, as an entrepreneur, I'm always asking, and the thing about it is that you've got to constantly be checking and question your own assumptions. Like, so things I've learned, I'm now challenging again, and things I thought I was right about, I'm challenging again, because not only are we changing, the market's changing, and people's information's changing, and so in short, I think being honest, telling stories, not just about the good. I think nonprofits do themselves and all of us a disservice by only talking about what's good. I spent equal time with our top investors talking about what's not working. And we do the same thing with our partners in Africa. Half the forum is about what's not working, and half the visit when I go or our staff goes is exploring what's not working and celebrating those failures. Like, what is not working? What are you learning about this? And being honest with our donors about things that are not working, I think invites them into how complicated it is. And one of our board members was with me in January or in September, and she said her first day off the plane, first day, like within an hour, we were visiting her partnership, and she just started crying. She just, Ryan, 10 years you've been doing this. This just seems so, and I was like, inadequate? And she goes, yeah, inadequate. Like, how is this enough? And I said to her, everywhere we look, not just in Zimbabwe or Zambia, but everywhere we look in any area, there's $100,000 of need and maybe a $2,000 worth of capacity to do anything about it. If I give those people 3, I feel better, but they're no better off. I'm actually creating corruption. If they can manage $2,000, there's $100,000 of need, no doubt. But if I only give them 2 and they can actually manage 2 effectively, that's better than if I give them 3. I feel better and I've created a corrupt environment. That's not good. So I think just being honest with people is the best way I can bring our donors in to help them see that we're trying to do the impossible. But at Forgotten Voices, as we wrap up here, like at Forgotten Voices, we're driven to do that because A, we believe that where God is working, God is working always, and how can we join him? I think that's a framing question for all of us. And we're just not satisfied with the common response. We're in a race, okay? This is my last, I know we're done, 10 seconds. We're in a race. ISIS is on the move. I'm seeing it in East Africa, right? It's pouring down East Africa. We're in a race. Someone's always going to find vulnerable children. Kids who have lost their moms or dads are not going to be alone for very long. Someone is going to find them. Let it be us. 90% of money goes to orphanages and things that we build, and we have to go 4 or 5 times a year to watch them. Where the local church is growing faster than ever. Equally called by God, equally committed and talented guys like Remy who can do it, know what to do, and are driven to do so more than we are. How can we tell this story differently? So let us win the race. That's what Forgotten Voices is doing. And don't let it be just a promotion for us. Think about, where is God moving in your lives? How is he pushing doors open in unexpected ways? And how can you contribute to that? Don't worry about the 10 years from now. That'll take care of it. I'm loving my job more than I ever have. I wouldn't have said that a year ago, but you know, things change. Keep going, keep grinding. God has this, and he has chosen us to help. Thanks very much for your time. God bless you. Have a good night. Good day.